The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, launched an attack on the office of the president of Ukraine and the cabinet of ministers and began listing exactly what achievements he can claim in service to the country. And of course, he also lashed out at Mikhailo Fedorov and started making excuses in his own favor, saying that he's not such a bad commander-in-chief after all. The confrontation between the military leadership and the civilian government seems to be entering a hot phase. For the fifth day, protests are taking place across Ukraine in support of Fedorov and demanding Syrsky's resignation. Let me remind you, Fedorov himself spoke about the conflict with the commander-in-chief, saying Syrsky gave the president an ultimatum, either him or the defense minister. The general staff denied everything today, and Syrsky himself remained silent for several days. And now this evening, July 20th, on the day when a meeting of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief's staff was scheduled for the evening, where his fate was to be decided, Syrsky breaks this days-long silence. He published a lengthy column titled "My Work is to Blame" on the Militarny portal. Well, this is essentially his public defense and at the same time a tough response to everyone who accused him of conflicts and sabotage. And this is also direct evidence of behind-the-scenes warfare at the highest levels of power. Let's analyze this text together in full, because you can't afford to miss a single word in it. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. It seems to me, subjectively, that Syrsky started to take credit for some achievements that most likely don't actually belong to him. And he has frankly started making excuses for certain actions. So, let's break down this article and analyze it. And I'll also add some background to piece everything together into a coherent picture instead of just reading his column. My name is Pechiy. Let's do this together. Let's discuss this topic. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're moving toward the 300,000 subscribers mark, so I would appreciate your subscription. So, the first question. Why did the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, who had been silent for several days, suddenly start speaking? Syrsky begins his column by admitting that publicity is foreign to him. Quote, "To be honest, I'm not interested in media work. I'm not building an image and I have no political ambitions. I'm focused on the war, 24/7. That's why I rarely give interviews and almost never write columns. The reason? Well, the reason he decided to write this text and speak out. The commander-in-chief explains it like this. But in recent days, my silence has started to be interpreted as agreement. A whole mythology has grown around the army and the general staff about conflicts and sabotage, so for once, I'll say everything myself." And here is the first and probably the most sensitive part of his column about that very conflict with the Minister of Defense, Mikhail Fedorov, which started everything. And here, Syrsky takes a deliberately conciliatory position, but with a hidden agenda, I'd say. You know, there's a very tricky logic here. Before I quote, let me remind you that on the day it became known that Fedorov was being dismissed, Syrsky rather confidently wrote, "Thank you, Minister, for your work. Well, all the best in life, and most importantly, stay on Ukraine's team." It sounded quite confident, but now Syrsky writes, quote, "It was a surprise for me to learn that the minister and I had a conflict. I saw our relationship as professional, with difficult issues and differing positions. That's how it should be between two institutions during a full-scale war." Syrsky even personally apologizes to Fedorov, addressing him by his full name and patronymic. Quote, "If I've offended anyone in any way, Mikhail Albertovich, I'm sorry. I can be tough sometimes." Well, and here he immediately shifts the conversation from personalities to personal matters. But I ask you, and everyone who is now following this story with interest, let's focus not on the personal, but on the bigger picture, on victory. And here is the key idea of this part of Syrsky's column. Ukraine is bigger than Fedorov, bigger than Syrsky, and bigger than any of us. Ukraine will endure not because it has irreplaceable people, but because it has an army, institutions, and millions of people who do their jobs. According to him, reducing this war to a confrontation between two individuals is the biggest favor we can do for the enemy. He also addresses the division of society into two camps. Quote, "I see how people are splitting into the Fedorov camp and the Syrsky camp. As soon as an issue related to the war or the military becomes politicized, it gets simplified into a slogan, but each of the issues currently being debated online, contracts, procurement, mobilization, is much more complicated than any post about it. Decisions that people's lives depend on are not made with slogans. And from this, he derives the main principle on which he builds all his further arguments. Quote, "War is won by real work, not by public drama around it. So from now on, it will not be about relationships, but about work." And now Syrsky moves on to the essence of his defense, in particular, the division of areas of responsibility between the General Staff and the Ministry of Defense. And here comes the most interesting part, in my opinion, because this is where the story begins. He was responsible for this, so he should have done it. I was responsible for that, so here are the achievements. Where there are achievements, that's me. Where there are screw-ups, I'll say it straight, that's Fedorov. Fedorov. That's how this story begins. So basically, he goes on to explain that many of the accusations against him are actually misplaced. Quote, "The Ministry of Defense is about providing for the troops, procurement, developing policies, and civilian control over the armed forces of Ukraine. This is a huge job, without which the army can't fight. The Minister of Defense doesn't have to be personally on the front lines and doesn't have to be a war strategist. That's not his job and not his responsibility. The war strategy, operation planning, and the situation at the front, by law, that's my responsibility to the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. Long-range strikes and the isolation of Crimea are conducted by the Armed Forces, Security Service, Main Intelligence Directorate, and State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, coordinated by the Supreme Commander-in-Chief and me." And he emphasizes that it's not about jealousy of someone else's success, that's just how it works. Quote, "Not because I'm preventing someone from achieving success, but because that's how institutional processes are structured in all the armies of the world." And here he also responds to accusations of lacking a strategy, and he answers quite sharply. "When I'm reproached for lacking a strategy, let me remind you of a simple thing. War strategy is not a public document and not a post on social media. It is reported to the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, and its results are visible at the front, where an army of 1 million has been holding back a superior enemy for the 4th year. And then he adds a phrase that sounds like a direct reproach to all critics, not just Fedorov. Anyone who demands that the Commander-in-Chief present the strategy publicly is demanding that he present it to the enemy. Separately, Syrsky points out the differences, as he put it, between trendy words and real work, and directly attacks Mikhail Fedorov, implying that he only throws around loud words and does nothing else. Quote, "Lately, there's been a lot of talk about vision. Vision is a useful thing. With vision, you can build a startup. But to win a war, you need a strategy. Vision paints the desired future. Strategy answers the question of where to get reserves, ammunition, people, and time to reach that future." Again, directly, even though he doesn't name the source, Syrsky responds to Fedorov's words about the ultimatum and to the criticism of micromanaging the troops. He appeals to his combat experience, quote, "I have served in the army for more than 40 years. I am a military man. I do not give ultimatums to my superior, and I do not manage the troops through messaging apps. A 1 million-strong army is not managed through WhatsApp. It is managed through headquarters orders and the responsibility of commanders on the ground." And as proof to the contrary that he is actually decentralizing comm and not keeping everything in his own hands, he gives a specific example. Quote, "One of my recent decisions was to delegate authority to the corps commanders, including the power to transfer troops, servicemen within the corps. This is the opposite of micromanagement." Now next comes one of the central and one of my favorite sections of Syrsky's column. This is the response to the accusation that Syrsky supposedly underestimates drones and is generally against technology in the army. He calls this reproach the strangest one he has heard. Here is his quote, "I was the one who created the unmanned systems forces as a separate branch of the military. I personally submitted the candidacy of Magyar to the president to appoint Major Magyar as the head of the unmanned systems forces. It was an unpopular decision, and I took full responsibility for it. To be honest, I personally didn't understand since when the creation of the unmanned systems forces became unpopular. Well, if you understood, please let me know. because this phrase unpopular is a bit populist. That's usually what politicians say. I made an unpopular decision that led us to some outstanding results. He says that creating SBS was an unpopular decision and he took responsibility for it, and here are the results. I don't know. He also explains why he specifically chose Robert Magyar Brody. Quote, because he not only rose from soldier to officer, but also created a unique unit and has a vision. We all see the result every day. Here, I want to personally say, of course, a huge thank you to Magyar. And here is Syrsky's conclusion from this whole story, and it's categorical. A person who doesn't want to fight with drones doesn't create the world's first separate branch of unmanned systems and doesn't appoint a commander to lead it, going against all the traditions of military hierarchy. Well, in short, it's obvious now that Fedorov and Syrsky will be arguing about whose achievement this really is. Syrsky is already hinting that the creation of unmanned systems forces and all these drone strikes on Russia are already his personal achievement. I won't comment on whether that's true or not. Well then, he goes on to say what he considers his duty as the person responsible for the front, which is a warning against focusing only on drones. Quote, drones today account for a large share of strikes, that's a fact. But to prepare the battlefield for effective drone operations, you need artillery, mortars, engineering equipment, air defense, electronic warfare, and dozens of other types of equipment. Further, according to him, the General Staff submits to the Ministry of Defense a complete list of what is needed for the war. Everything needs to be purchased, not just what's currently trending, writes Syrsky. Well, this is already an answer to what we've talked about in previous episodes. The generals were actually accusing Mikhailo Fedorov of buying things for the army that they hadn't asked for at all. Like, you can't buy us drones if we're asking for mortars. Fedorov, on the other hand, hinted that the generals were demanding to buy only certain weapons from certain manufacturers, which already smelled like corruption. And then Syrsky warns about the danger of, as he put it, sudden experiments. Quote, we are not fighting against a hypothetical small country. We are facing a superior enemy in every way, who is fighting us with artillery, aviation, and infantry. I can't switch a million-strong army to drones in 2 months and say, now we fight like this, and he calls such a move a reckless gamble. Alexander Syrsky also responds to the accusation that he allegedly promotes only people loyal to him. Those who are not loyal stay stuck in low-level posts. Here he gives such a long list of last names. Quote, Magyar, Apostol, Gnatov, Andrei Beletsky, Redis, Veres, Achilles, Evgeny Karas. This list can go on. These are people who rose from junior officers to leadership positions. I appoint them, I promote them, I work with them. Many of these appointments were unpopular in the system. I made them because my only criterion is results. Friends, once again I can't resist. Which of the listed combat officers' appointments was unpopular? Here Syrsky is talking for the second time in his column about making some unpopular decisions. Why is Syrsky trying for the second time to make it look like he was taking some huge risk, making an unpopular decision? Because everyone around him was against it, but he made a breakthrough by appointing someone unpopular. So Syrsky is talking again about how he makes unpopular appointments, that he promotes them, that he works with them. Many of these appointments were unpopular in the system. Here Syrsky, for the second time in his column, talks about unpopular decisions. Redis, Veres, Achilles, or Yevgeny Karas. These are the ones Syrsky personally listed. Which of them was unpopular? I don't understand this point. If you understand, please write in the comments. Maybe I really missed something. If that's the case, I'll admit it and say yes, I was wrong. At the same time, Syrsky admits there's a problem with the bureaucracy of transfers, but immediately points out that the problem exists, but it's not his fault. Do you know why? Because that's the responsibility of the Ministry of Defense, not his. Quote, yes, the transfer procedures are long and complicated, but these procedures are defined by regulations that were developed long before me and it's the Ministry of Defense that should change them. I will support any simplification that doesn't undermine command and control of the troops. And now we've reached the section where Syrsky finally openly starts attacking Mikhailo Fedorov. The sharpest, actually counter-attacking section is about the administrative work of the Ministry of Defense. Here, Syrsky presents facts that hit Fedorov directly. First, about new contracts for the military. Remember, we also discussed this topic with you on this YouTube channel. Quote, "The new contracts were presented more than a month ago. As of today, about 2,000 servicemen have signed them out of a 1,000,000-strong army. At the same time, I received a large number of demotivated soldiers and officers who expected one set of conditions but got another." He then questions the legal validity of this initiative and compares it to how it should have been done. He says this is bad and it should have been done differently. He knows how. Quote, "The very decree about the experiment raises serious legal questions. Compare. The increase in pay in the Ministry of Internal Affairs system was carried out through changes in the budget and through the Verkhovna Rada. That's the difference between a decision and a presentation, because presentation shouldn't turn into self-promotion. Behind every slide there should be a document, a budget, and a program, a procedure. Otherwise, instead of a solution, the army gets disappointment." In part, I can agree with Syrsky here that indeed there should be documents, budgets, and procedures behind every slide. Everything should have been perfectly calculated in advance before presenting all of this. And Syrsky says the same thing about the mobilization reform. Again, I emphasize that the task was set by President Zelensky, but it's not him who should carry it out. No, of course not, but the Ministry of Defense. Here's another quote from Syrsky. And this one is very telling that yes, there really was a very tough conflict between him and Fedorov, with both trying to shift responsibility onto each other and say, all the good things are because of me, all the bad things are because of him. Next, a quote. "The ground forces and the territorial recruitment centers are under my command and we are ready for changes. We attend all sessions of the Verkhovna Rada. We report all violations to the State Bureau of Investigation. We insist on involving the police in mobilization. But the reform itself, the legislative and administrative work, is specifically the responsibility of the Ministry of Defense. I am waiting for it just like the whole country is waiting for it." Well, in short, here Syrsky says it directly. Listen, there are problems with mobilization. There are also problems with the territorial recruitment centers, but stop bothering me with these questions. Fedorov was supposed to handle this. He says mobilization and territorial recruitment centers are the Ministry of Defense's responsibility, not his. If something's wrong, send it all there. And Fedorov on his part insists, leave me alone. The territorial recruitment centers report directly to the ground forces, and the ground forces report directly to Alexander Syrsky. And he was the one who was supposed to solve this problem. So, as you can see, once again, they're passing this really difficult problem onto each other. But the harshest criticism directed at Fedorov concerns the service members' pay. This is really a controversial issue, and here Syrsky, well, you can partly agree with him too. On the other hand, looking at the results at the front, and not just at the front, you start to think that maybe it really was worth going through with this experiment. So Syrsky directly links the problem of service members' pay to Fedorov's decision. Quote, "Minister Fedorov himself publicly said that part of the funds from the military salaries was used to purchase drones. And because of this, the issue of funding payments arose for the second half of the year. The position of the Commander-in-Chief on this issue can basically be considered the culmination of this entire column that was published today. Quote, I'll be direct. A soldier's salary is not something to be reallocated. It's an obligation of the state to the people who risk their lives every day. According to Syrsky, together with the government, they are now looking for a solution so that every serviceman receives their due on time and in full. And, as he says, a lesson for the future. Decisions about billions cannot be made without considering the consequences for 1 million people. And separately, Alexander Syrsky emphasizes who this whole piece is addressed to. This is already a rebuke to the protesters and those who are unhappy. Quote, I want to emphasize separately, this column is not for those who argue on social media. It is for those who bear the burden of war every day. Our soldiers don't care who out-argued whom on the internet. They need ammunition, rotation, timely payments, and confidence that the state is behind them and doing its job, not bickering. And in the end, Syrsky strikes notes that sound at once like, an oath of loyalty to the state. And like a statement that he's not planning to leave just like that. Quote, I'm not fighting with the ministry. I'm fighting with Russia. The General Staff has never opposed the ministry. We have cooperated and will continue to cooperate with any minister appointed by the state, because in the army you don't get to choose who you serve with. In the army, you follow orders and do your job. And this whole column ends, I would say, with an almost policy statement from the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Quote, my job is war. Strategy, the front, people, this is what I do and what I will continue to do. Preferably without interviews and columns. Well, what he means is, leave me alone, I'm fighting, that's it, don't bother me. And the final chord, which brings us back to the main idea of this whole text, sounds like this. Ukraine is bigger than any one person, and Ukraine will endure if everyone does their job in their own place. Now let's add more background. Clearly, the column by Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrsky, didn't appear out of nowhere. And its appearance today, July 20th, is also not a coincidence. In short, it all started on July 15th when Zelensky dismissed the Minister of Defense, Mikhailo Fedorov, formalizing it through the resignation of the entire cabinet. Later, we all learned that the whole problem was an irreconcilable conflict between Fedorov and Syrsky. Then the problems began. Protests first in support of Fedorov, then against Syrsky. The protesters demanded to reinstate Fedorov as Minister of Defense and to dismiss Commander-in-Chief Syrsky. Fedorov himself has already made it clear that he is ready to return, but only to the position of Minister of Defense. As we understood from Syrsky's column, he is not planning to leave at all. Amid the protests, Zelensky has been meeting combat commanders personally for several days. In particular, this includes Pechiy, the Deputy Chief of the General Staff in the Armed Forces of Ukraine. This is Volodymyr Horbatyuk. This is the commander of the Air Assault Forces, Ole Apostol. This is the commander of the 3rd Army Corps, Andriy Beletsky, and so on. But right now, all the discussions are basically centered around these four as the main candidates to replace Syrsky. All of them are being considered as replacements for Alexander Syrsky, but I already released a separate, detailed episode on this topic, so I won't dwell on it here. Be sure to go to my YouTube channel and watch it. Even better, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy and News. The link is in the description of this video. All the materials are posted there, and all the announcements for new episodes on YouTube are also there, so you won't miss anything and can clearly decide what you want to watch and what you don't necessarily need to. Because there I post video announcements and clearly outline the structure of each episode. You can quickly read and understand what the episode will be about. Let's get back to the topic. Exactly on June 20th. On the day Syrsky's column was published, the General Staff, as you know, released a statement denying the rumors about Syrsky's dismissal, stating that he continues to perform his duties, as does Hnatov, and that dismissal is only possible based on a presidential decree. At the same time, the head of the president's office, Kirilo Budanov, addressed the public today and stated that Zelensky has heard the protesters. And against this whole background, a few hours before the announcement, today the Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky published his column. In fact, this is his public statement in his own defense at a crucial moment. He responds to all the key accusations, hits back at the Ministry of Defense, and at the same time demonstrates loyalty to the state, emphasizing that he will work with any minister who is appointed. And as I mentioned at the beginning, he even apologizes to Fedorov. He says, well, sometimes I'm tough, maybe I misunderstood you and I didn't think we had a conflict at all. It's also worth mentioning that Syrsky became the head of Ukraine's armed forces in February 2024, replacing the then popular Valery Zaluzhny, who was later sent as ambassador to London. And in Ukrainian and Western media, Syrsky has already been called tough more than once. He has been nicknamed the Butcher for his commitment to holding positions at any cost, which critics unfortunately associate with high casualties. Will there be a decree dismissing Syrsky after today's meeting of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief's staff, or will his articles still become part of a successful defense? And whether he will remain in his position will become known in the coming hours or days. At least for now. At this moment, as I'm recording this episode, the announced Supreme Commander-in-Chief's staff meeting still hasn't started, and there is already even suspicion that it might not happen today at all. Well, or it will happen very late at night, and right now, they are still selecting a candidate. Or is Zelensky still weighing the decision to dismiss Syrsky and replace him with another commander? Basically, right now everything is completely up in the air. But I want to emphasize the publication of Syrsky's column, in which he justifies himself, defends himself, and counterattacks, shows that the sword of Damocles is really hanging over him, and it's possible that they really are trying to dismiss him. At least the sources I am in contact with say that all of this is really being prepared. So I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like, if you want to support. Support the work of this YouTube channel, I would be grateful for that. You can do this with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. Let me remind you, we are engaged exclusively in independent journalism. We don't work with any media, any political parties, and so on. That's why your support is extremely important. I'll leave it at that. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.